Welcome to the Trailblazers. I'm Perry Rarick, your host and chief editor of Follow Your Buyer. The purpose of this interview series is to share with you interesting discussions I have with trailblazing thought leaders. They're innovative, thought-provoking. They're not afraid to challenge the status quo, and they serve as vanguards for positive transformation. My trailblazer guest today is Heather Nielsen Sugrue. She is a highly accomplished sales and marketing executive in the B2B life sciences space. Her extraordinary career is best described, and this isn't even going to be adequate, is best described as one of embracing a series of challenging roles and accepting more and more responsibility as she continuously grew professionally as well as personally. The life sciences companies she has served in, it's a who's who. It's like that one of those best of the best lists of organizations in the B2B pharmaceutical space, to include research and development, drug product services, contract development and manufacturing of drugs, all leading to management roles in marketing and sales in a really challenging space, CDMOs in the cell and gene therapy space. And as I got to know Heather, okay, I would describe her professional journey as she always sought more challenging roles and more responsibility. She never forgot the path that led her there, the roles she had, and the people she worked with that shaped her leadership style. She currently advises, consults, and supports CDMOs. Thank you for joining me today, Heather. Welcome to the Trailblazers.
Thank you kindly, Perry. It is so lovely to be here, and I am so pleased to have been connected to you through Corey Coleman. The conversations that we've had have been just truly inspiring, and being able to speak with you and learn who you are. So thank you. I really appreciate the introduction and the ability to join you today.
Well, it's great to have you. So before we get into what we had planned to talk about, which is cell and gene therapy, this very complex space, this difficult landscape, business-wise, science-wise, it's hard to understand. But before we do that, we're going to spend plenty of time on that. So my introduction was woefully inadequate. Can you talk a little bit about how did you arrive where you are today?
So your introduction actually was quite well, and just the journey that I've taken. And I started out early in really commodity type sales. I got into the CDMO space in about 2008. I continued to get closer to the patient as I got into the drug to product, and also got into drug substance, and continued to move forward towards the patient as you get into commercialization, et cetera. But it was a couple years ago in 2021 when I was lucky enough to join a webinar that I had heard about through ZymeWire. ZymeWire, for those of you who do not know, is probably one of the best BD prospecting tools that are out there from my perspective. I've utilized them since the early teens. Pete Pistato is the CEO. He's an extraordinary person who's done a lot in building this tool. And he had a webinar that was focused specifically on what is the difference between small molecule and biologics and the up and coming cell and gene therapy. And I have always had an interest in understanding that. I had always been in the small molecule and large molecule space when I was with Patheon and Recro and other companies. And when I sat and listened to this webinar, it was really inspiring because it really showed a very defined line between how oral solid and biologics manufacturing within the CDMO space is managed, the importance of the different levels and different areas that need to take place, and the difference and the gap between what has to happen for cell and gene therapy. And what I kind of related to is just there's such an intimate approach to what needs to be within cell and gene therapy. And one of the things ZymeWire did is they actually created this fantastic document, and the presentation itself went through it. I think there were 3 or 4 different presenters, and the task was within their various areas, whether they were consultants, regulatory, within the CDMO space to define what they see as the difference between these three different modalities. And I'm looking at a screen here because I want to share a couple of the things that were really impactful for me. And it's the comparison factor, the way this is laid out, how it pertains to small molecules and monoclonal biologics, and then how it pertains to cell and gene therapy. So one of them is manufacturing culture focus, right? So how is that viewed within small molecule and biologics? And it says, let's show the world how this drug works, right? We know this drug, we have an indication, we're developing this drug. Let's show the world how this can work. If you say that to the same in the cell and gene therapy space, it says, let's help give these patients hope, right? Like because this is ability to cure something, not just the ability to bring a therapeutic help to it, right? So let's help give these patients hope. That was very impactful when I read that. Manufacturing as a liability, right? We all have liabilities when we're manufacturing within the CDMO. We have contracts that protect us and that we align with our sponsors. From a small molecule perspective, it says not a huge priority. There's known technologies, there's known manufacturing processes. So it's pretty dialed in, right? So the liability can be fairly lower, the manufacturing process. From monoclonal, kind of nice to have. When you look at cell and gene therapy, it's a really high priority early on because it's so important to get it right, because you are dealing with direct patients and personalized medicine that directly impacts that patient. I think that the last thing I'll say maybe is just data timing needs, right? When you are working within small molecule, asynchronous is okay. Like it can just kind of happen, right? Data timing, it continues. And as you get it in, you listen, you learn, and you continue to move forward. For biologics, mostly so, but it requires a coordination of data delivery. When you look at cell and gene therapy, it's real time. I need to know this information now, because in order for me to get to the next step, I need to have that, or it's just not going to be possible. So it just really highlighted the differences between the established small molecule and biologics, and then the importance of this intimate approach that you have to have there in order to move the process through for cell and gene therapy, because it's utilizing the patient's genes and cells to manipulate and bring that product back to them to help the therapeutic into the patient and cure them at the end of the day.
Well, you do a great job of describing that, because I am a non-scientist. So you use really practical terms, and I can understand, the difference. So I have to ask, I know you're motivated by challenges, and what motivated you to jump in? That's a daunting world. I would describe it as. What motivated you to get involved in that?
Quite honestly, every single thing that I looked at in this webpage and listened to, or this webinar, and what I listened to, and then when I looked at these different complexities and differences, the way cell and gene therapy has to work aligns with who I am as a leader and how I like to work. So when you talk about the intimate supply chain process, and the supply chain process is, getting cells from a patient and bringing it into the CDMO and manipulating the cells in which needs to happen, where it's coming in from a manufacturing perspective, and then it has to go through a supply chain to get out the door and back to the patient. If you don't have continued connection, collaboration, transparency, openness, and partnership in that whole process, it's not going to work. And I have always brought that kind of approach to my leadership when I come into a company. It's so important to me to know who the operational folks are. And that's from development into analytical. And how is analytical and QC connected? And from a BD perspective, BDs are external. We're outside of the building, so to speak, right? So we're not there every day. So it's very front of mind. You need to have a proactive approach to developing those relationships internally to those folks, to make sure that what I always like to say is the BD needs to know what the operational folks are doing, and the operational folks need to know what the BD are selling. And if there's a disconnect, you're just off. You're not going to win, right? So there has to be that communication. And I feel very strongly that that needs to be across the whole organization. And from the people bringing boxes in the front door, to the people sweeping the floor, to people working really elaborate equipment, to the person welcoming guests through the front door. All of that is so important, and that collaboration and connection needs to be there. And that's what I've always brought to my job. And when I saw that this was such a necessity, that it had to be there, I thought, I want to be in that space because it drives that behavior that is so important to me.
You raise so many interesting features of this space, and I want to separate three of them and have you speak a little bit more about it. One of them is going to be the science.
Yeah.
And then the other is going to be the commercialization, that space. And then the other, something you just spoke about, which is the lash up between the commercial side of the business and operations. But first, so there are some science challenges in this. I've
Yeah.
heard about shortages of skills, not having enough of the right kind of people coming into this space. So can you highlight some of these scientific challenges of doing this kind of work?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I learned that, okay, this is the direction I wanted to go into in 2021. It didn't take me until the end of 2022 that I was actually able to get into a position to help support from a sales perspective, leading a BD team for a large CDMO in December of 2022. And what I learned very quickly in going to Advanced Therapies, which is one of the larger of the cell therapy conferences that are out there that happens every January. So within 3 weeks, I was immersed in the middle of learning a lot of these things about where cell and gene therapy is. And what I did learn really quickly was just how young it is, how that it truly is in its infancies of development. And what I also learned then was just really understanding the cadence of what happened over the past several years. And there were a couple of events that I feel has impacted the scientific robustness, if you will, that's out there right now, right? And one of them is that cell and gene therapy has always been there for a very long time, for decades. But some of the companies that were growing with them were growing at a pace that was appropriate because technologies were being learned, processes were being learned, people were learning from their mistakes, and it was getting better and moving forward. Some products were starting to become approved by the FDA, but even the FDA wasn't really clear because you're not talking about a drug substance and a drug product. You're talking about human cells or genetic material, and it's just a very different thing. So as these CDMOs and sponsors got more and more educated, there was an event that happened in 2018, 2019, where some of the larger CDMOs started to acquire some of these smaller, very focused, specialized CDMOs that focused on gene therapy and cell therapy because they wanted to get into those different modalities. And I spoke earlier about the very difference in how they're so different. But they were bringing them in as a modality over their umbrella to sort of, okay, we want this to move forward and be a part of it. But what happened is they got purchased at such a high value. So all of a sudden there was this misperception of the cost and the value of what gene therapy or cell therapy can really be to the market space, right? So that's one event that I kind of saw and recognized as something that maybe pushed gene therapy and cell therapy into a faster pace than they were really ready to do yet because they were still learning things, right?
Wow. So
And then of
this
course,
was like an awakening. It sounds like the lights are coming on. Okay. All right.
I believe so, right? And that people were really starting to see that there were some really positive things that were happening, that people were being cured by some gene therapy drugs that were being approved, and that this was a big thing. It's the next focus of where we're going into this personalized medicine. And so these companies were acquired at a very high value, and it gave this perception as being a high level of return on investment, right? So that always piques the ears of the VCs and the PEs that are out there, right? So that was one. But then the other thing that happened was COVID, right? Which derailed all of us. But it was the advanced therapies that helped us get through that, right? And there was a couple of CDMOs that did extremely well in coming up to the challenge of developing billions of vaccines to help the world, right? And there was a lot of value that was put on that. There were companies that were seeing high double digits in growth year over year to 50 to 60 to 70%, which is extremely unheard of, right? When you're working within the CDMO world. And then you get to the other side of that, and all of a sudden you start, and it was really well known in the industry, is called the COVID cliff, where, okay, we're kind of going back to normal, right? And we're not going to see these double digits, improvements in our revenues over years. So we kind of had to pull back a little bit. But so that the aggressiveness of the CDMOs and wanting to continue to gain these higher growth values were just unattainable. And so those were two key pieces that happened. But going back to your question on the scientific part of it, is that the way I saw it is that there were these very well-versed, very experienced people and scientists who really knew what they were doing. And when they started getting acquired by larger companies, you're going to see attrition. That happens. And because there was such a big boom in the concept and understanding and people wanting to get involved in cell and gene therapy, you saw more sponsors coming into play. So people who wanted to start actually developing cell therapies and gene therapies. And you got more CDMOs who said, "Oh, I want a part of this," right? So there was this growth spurt of cell and gene therapy CDMOs that happened. So I was reading numbers of back in like 2019, and I'm going to pick a number, maybe 40, right? And you fast forward to 2023, there was a 6x increase in number of CDMOs that were out there, right? So when I first learned about this in early 2023, there was maybe 125, and then all of a sudden there was 200, and now I understand there to be about 300. And I have some pretty good resources that I think those numbers are fairly valid. But what that does is it started to dilute the technology and knowledge across the number of companies that were out there. So you took this highly concentrated, really well-versed scientific people that then maybe left because they didn't like the culture, didn't like the business. It was no longer a small business. They wanted to either start themselves. And they started to move out across these other companies, and you started to dilute the knowledge, if you will. And someone who may have been at a manager level was all of a sudden a director level, when maybe they should have waited a couple of years to get there. And so the science was there, but it started to become lesser than, for lack of a better word. And the academic industry isn't there yet. They're starting to churn this out, right? They're recognizing that they need to have these majors and these focuses, and people are starting to come out on the other side. But again, the push of needing to build quickly early on based on these acquisitions, stalled things a little bit, and we're waiting for this new scientific, group of people to come out and sort of fill those gaps.
And these folks can't be produced quickly. I mean, the kind of
Right.
skills you're talking about, this isn't something that happens overnight. That's an interesting problem. I like the way you describe it, as the knowledge is diluted
Yeah.
across this space. Well, that's a huge problem. That's
Yeah.
okay. Now, all right. So all of these are linked. I want to transition to the commercialization of
Mhm.
this. But I guess we can't forget about that scientific trough, the valley.
Yeah.
But okay, so what kind of challenges is this space faced with in the commercialization of these drugs?
Well, and I think it's that the commercialization isn't quite there. It goes back to the infancy of the business, right? Of the science and the market space itself. 17 gene therapy products that are approved that are out there. There's been, a lot of research in the past that sort of projected that come 2025, there would be, 10 gene therapies a year that would be approved, and that we're moving in that direction. But the reality is there's not a lot that are out there, right? And when you look at all of these CDMOs that have built themselves, they've built themselves in a way that they're ready to capture these phase 3, almost into commercial assets by sponsors who are developing, when in reality, it's early development, it's process development, it's analytical development, it's figuring out the best way to develop their specific asset or gene that they're focusing on. And the scalability piece is still not quite there. And the products that are commercialized, I think there's only a couple that are truly actually manufactured by a CDMO. The rest are manufactured by the owner of that specific asset. So there's misperception around that as well, because commercial means long-term runway of revenue that is definitive, right? That is going to be there, right? Whereas development is up, it spikes and valleys, and you have it and may fail, and then you need to have another asset come in, and it is a revenue stream, but it's not consistent like revenue of a commercial program. And so part of it is just not recognizing that, and maybe building facilities more towards commercial, and really they should be building them more towards the development aspect of where a development process should be, or where an asset should be with a partnering with a company who has those types of assets that they want to develop.
I don't want to overstate this, but it sounds a bit like a train wreck. I mean, or maybe the train's not even getting down the tracks. Yeah. But so we have maybe a glut of commercial capabilities in the cell and gene CDMO space, but what drug sponsors need is the early development capabilities.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
And I asked a very well-versed person in this industry that what would be what's the ideal, right? What's the ideal if I'm going to create a CDMO? What do I need? And the ideal is being able to have a very strong development program, meaning personnel, the technical know-how, the equipment to do it. So a scalable process. So you can go from a flask into a small vessel to work on the parameters, do design of experiment, get the best parameters to move things forward, go to a 10 liter, go to a 20 liter, you work your way up however the cadence needs to be. There's a lot of platforms that are out there that do this. And then build the analytical background of it, which is extremely important, because analytical is always the backbone of any development process, because you have to show that you have what you're making, right? And then this transition into the GMP manufacturing portion of it. So if you have that, gaining a couple of clients who you can build the trust and partnership with, right, and build and gain some of that knowledge with them, but then also have the space, and I almost want to say physical space, to be able to then build out as the client grows your GMP facilities and the ability to scale up to where you need to be commercial. And it's being able to have all of that, and the importance of also under a single umbrella, because tech transfers are always a known thing within drug development. For small molecule biologics, you develop in one area, you scale up in another area, and then you commercialize in a third. That's costly, it's timely, it can be really impactful as to when you might get to market. For cell and gene therapy, it's even more so potentially detrimental, because you're also talking about much more specialized processes and systems that aren't necessarily more easily transferred from one location to another. So the ideal is a single facility or a single location in a single city, where you have the development and analytical, you have the ability to cross transfer into quality control, build out and manufacture from a GMP, and then scale up from there when it's needed.
So the lights are coming on for me. This is really enlightening. And something you said earlier about the important, that I don't think it's sunk in. It didn't get my attention like it is now. But you said the importance of the BD, the business development team, integrated with operations and the capabilities within that CDMO. That's critically important under the conditions that you're describing. When you have a large number of drug sponsors looking for early development, yet most of the CDMOs are providing the scale up. So that lash up seems like vital, that between the BDs and the operations now.
Thank you for bringing that back to focus, because that's exactly it, right? I think a lot of what I've seen in my conversations and as I've talked to various different CDMOs and understanding their challenges, that you get into this mentality of, let me throw a wide net out and pull something in and we'll figure out how to make it work. And the development process and the equipment, it's expensive, right? And it's an expensive endeavor. And when a BD is out trying to sell something that operations isn't maybe quite comfortable with, but at least they found some business, you're teeing yourself up to potentially fail and not meet that client expectation. So really understanding, okay, what is it that we're good at? Where is our scientific know-how? What is the equipment that supports that? And what is the message that we want to give our BD to be able to go and communicate and do their work and work on Zymewire to determine, who are the right people to get in front of and do the research, so that when they do engage with that client, they're 80% sure that there's going to be a match between what that client's interest is and what we can do or the organization can do from an internal perspective. And then you can tee yourself up to be successful. But what often happens, and again, thank you for bringing that up, because that to me is just so important. It's what I've always driven. There has to be a bridge of communication internally from the business development perspective. There needs to be a cadence of communication, of meetings that happen on a regular basis to say, here's what we're seeing in the market space. Here's what we're trying to position. This is, and then from the internal operational space, this is what we've built out. Here's what we have. This is what we've added on now. So we now have this capability too, so that you can then go and sell that and align there. Because what often happens is, again, you just need business. So they throw this wide net out, bring something in that really truly isn't aligned with their capability. And you're just teeing everybody up for failure. And the worst part about that is the one person who hurts the worst in that failure is the patient, because they're not getting what they need in a timely manner. Right. So that buildup of the internal capability and understanding what your client profile is, what are the definitions of the types of people that you want to get engaged with, being very thoughtful about the approach of doing that, and then having those conversations, bringing subject matter experts to the conversation early to start building that partnership and trust from the sponsor side. Then you can start building and getting in those one or two, and often is just one or two really good clients who you want to partner with, who you can grow with and gain, the level of respect and trust to continue with their process build on their particular product.
What a challenging picture you paint. At the very tactical level, what business development person wants to say no to a potential client? They're going to, I've done this. Well, these people want X. Can't we develop X? Can't we build X real quick? Because I don't want to say no.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. And I think it's easier again, when you talk about the different modalities, I think it's easier in oral solid because there's so many well-known technologies that are there. And a lot of the larger CDMOs have all of that. When you're talking cell therapy and gene therapy, because again, those two are two separate things, they often get clumped together. But, they need to decide, are they both? Are they one or the other? And if they're one, they need to know how to do it and be really good at it. And then the BD needs to be 100% aligned with that. Because you're right, a BD wants to go out and sell, and so that they can hit their target, make their money, and do well for the organization. But if they sell something that's truly not what the company can then support, then again, you're only going to end up with a disgruntled client, and the internal folks are going to be frustrated because they can't execute on something that the BD's brought in. And then that's when you get a lot of finger pointing and a lot of bad culture that just starts to develop, because, they're not giving me things I need, and well, you're not giving me direction that I need, and it turns into a finger pointing process.
Yeah, certainly. And thank you also for bringing it back to the patient. In the end, that's what's motivating the innovators.
Yeah.
There's somebody at the end of this complex process that's hoping that you're going to be successful. And there are just so many things working against that, that you just described under these conditions that we're facing right now.
Yeah. Yeah, there really is. And again, because it's so early in its infancies, there are a few people, and I've read a couple articles about the such a small percentage of people who actually get involved in, or can get involved in, some of these clinical trials to benefit from. And so there's still a learning curve, really, of what kind of indications can we really get to. And that was one thing that trying to remember what conference I was at, but it was FDA person who was overviewing sort of the scale of where we are. And when, cell and gene therapy started in orphan indications for a reason, because that's the scale they were able to make. Right. And then now we're in a position where we have indications that are a little bit larger, and that we can really kind of focus on that, because now we know how to scale adhesions. You can scale adhesion cell lines up or out, and have multiple of these pieces of equipment. There's now suspension, which is a way of scaling up, but then you lose tighter concentration, all these other things. So there is a lot of still scientific questions that are out there, but we've not been able to get to the larger indications, because from a scalability and technical perspective, we can't get there. So what that means is there's a lot of patients that get left out for being able to utilize this yet, or it's not quite ready for quote unquote mainstream, because some of these technologies, and this is how I see it, is that there are just processes and technologies that have yet to be discovered. And
Yeah.
that's just where we are, and so we have what we have, and we have the ability to do it, but that's where the COGS, the cost of goods, gets so high that then the drug becomes so expensive.
Yeah.
And really, how many patients are you really actually able to support with the $2 million price tag? And then there's complexities of insurance and all that other kind of stuff that I don't have a lot of knowledge around, but clearly that is becoming, that is a problem, because how do you get patients the product if it is available?
Wow. Okay. So if that's not challenging enough to cause everybody to say uncle, okay. So I'm gonna reintroduce something you've mentioned, another feature of this landscape that adds more challenges. There's a lot of investment activity going on. So there's a lot of venture capital money being pumped into these CDMOs, and those companies have different kinds of outcomes. Not that they don't care about patients, but they have a different outcome in mind, and a lot of times the path to that outcome may not completely support and overcome these challenges that you're talking about. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and VCs and PEs are probably not going to appreciate my response here, but I do feel that they're breaking it a little bit from a CDMO perspective, because the way I see it, this isn't Silicon Valley boom, right? This isn't, I'm going to invest in a technology and, a computer technology that can grow in a year's time, and you see your return on investment overnight at tenfold, right? I mean, drug development takes time. And, from what was, concept to commercialization, a 15-year process, has probably has scaled down quite a bit, maybe concept to 7 years, but it's not concept to 3 years. And a lot of times when a VC invests, they want to see a return on investment in a fairly quick manner. What that does, again, is it speeds up the need for the processes and systems and people to deliver before they're ready to. And visually, I always see kind of somebody, running and stumbling, trying to get their feet underneath them, right? To kind of keep up with the need of what's being out there.
What a great visual that is.
Yeah, yeah. Or I always see that, or they're not going to get their money unless they hit this milestone, and they've got to do this stumbling, get up there, let's just get there and make it happen to get the next churn or input of money, so that they can do the next steps that they need to do. So, it's not it's the expectations of the VC and the private equity that I feel can become a problem, because you want the science to be correct, you want the science to work, and you need to have the patience to allow the science to take time. And if you look at, again, this is another difference when you talk about oral solids and gene therapy. Oral solids has a much quicker timeline from concept to commercialization, because there are known technologies and people know how to get it there quickly, right? The design of experiment is much more dialed in, and there are things that they can even do proactively or preemptively to get something to work more quickly. It's not there yet in cell and gene therapy. So, what you might look at and see a 3 to 5 year turnaround if you're investing in a CDMO for a small molecule, it's probably going to be, and this is my estimation, like a 7 to 10 year time frame. When you're looking at cell and gene therapy, because they're just not there yet, and you need that time to be able to allow it to develop.
And yet the CDMOs, that nevertheless they need the investment, they need the resources. Yeah. So that's so how does that interaction? How would you, if you had a magic wand, okay, and you could wave over the industry? How does that relationship between CDMOs and VCs? How could that be better? What would you do?
Well, there are VCs and private equity firms out there who do understand the industry and do have the patience, know what a cell therapy or a gene therapy approach is going to be like. And I think a lot of that, and I remember thinking this back when I had been working with Patheon and you run into VCs, then it's knowing what you're getting into and knowing, again, what that look of return on investment is. And when you get people who are educated in the science of it and in the drug development space specifically, then you're clearly much better off, because at least they understand the process, right? I think it's the same for cell and gene therapy. And I'm not an expert in this, and I don't know how many VCs that are out there that are, really focused in that space. But waving a magic wand would be to have those VCs educated well enough to know how to invest and when to invest in a CDMO, and understanding the cadence of how you see that coming to a return on investment, and having the patience in doing so. Because a lot of the build that you need to do internally to build the right foundation to start getting the right momentum takes time. And, if you talk about from a BD perspective, when you get a prospect to a potential signed contract could be upwards of 18 months. It's not a 3 to 5 month process. And so understanding that of all the pieces that come into play when you're going through the process of collaborating with a potential sponsor or potential client, the site visits, the quality, assessments, the negotiation process, the building out of the scope of work or what really needs to happen, the allowing them to see and believe that they can really partner with you, and then them doing that with 10 other CDMOs before they can pick their one that they want to move forward with. All of that takes time. And that's, I think I was going to mention that earlier too, that one of the bigger differences too in a CDMO space, small molecules, if you talk to a client, they might look at 3 or 4 CDMOs before they really choose, okay, who am I going to go with? When you look at the cell and gene therapy space, they may be looking at 9 or 10. And so it just muddies the water, right? And of those 300 CDMOs that are out there that fit in this space of cell and gene therapy, it's extremely fragmented. They may only have 1 or 2 portions of the process. And then you get into this whole tech transfer piece again. So if you distill that number down and really who are the people out there that can help from beginning to end and have that potential either commercial capability already in place or the space available to build out, that number can scale down to 25 or 30. But clients don't see that, and clients don't understand that, and they want to do the best they can to move their program forward. So it just muddies the water quite a bit.
And clients are also, they have a relationship with investors as well.
Yeah,
And they have milestones they have to hit. So all of this is happening at the same time.
at the same time. Exactly. And then VCs might, highlight a vendor that they want their, client to go towards. And maybe it's really not the right vendor for them. It's maybe doesn't quite fit, the profile of what they need and the resources that they need to get their program to move forward from a development perspective.
All right. So I want to transition into some of the solutions that you have in mind that could, make this work better. One of them that seems to come top of mind as I'm listening to you talk is empathy. Empathy for one another. What is the purpose of the VC, the CDMO, the client, all of these relationships? So there's got to be like some new knowledge gain about this space. Am I reading you right on that?
I think so. I think so. And quite frankly, empathy and communication to me can solve all problems, honestly, right? But when you look at the cell and gene therapy space and the complexities that are out there and the numbers that are out there and the numbers that continue to grow, we will hit a tipping point. I mean, that's reality, right? There are going to be some of these companies that are going to fail and they'll start to fall off, and the 300 number is going to come down to 200. It might come down even more. You'll see more and more acquisitions to kind of fill that space, to make that particular company that may be fragmented be a little bit more holistic as to what they can truly offer. So there's a lot of angles that I think need to happen to move forward. But if you take a particular facility, and focus on that in particular, it is the full understanding of what's happening from end to end. And again, going back to that intimacy and the need for no silos when you're working within that entity, and that the development people really truly need to understand what's going on from an analytical perspective. There has to be relationship, partnership, communication, transparency. The transition from analytical to quality control, it's a known issue where they're very different, right? Analytical is developing, quality is then executing. And when you do that transfer, there often is riff, like, no, that's your problem. You need to do that. That's what you're supposed to do. But you just can't have that. And to me, that takes effort, from a managerial perspective to make sure that there's the right kind of collaborative meetings in place, understanding, education of the different types of what's happening, right? And learning somebody else's job sometimes I think is important, because you can then understand and have a level of respect and appreciation. I think respect is a really key word of what that person is bringing to the table, because everybody's bringing something to the table to make the job work at the end of the day, right? And so it's starts from the top to make sure from an ELT perspective that you're aligned and understand what the needs are for the organization to be successful. And then that then trickles down and makes sure that from the team's perspective, they also understand and appreciate that what each is doing. And the other piece to that too, for me, is taking the blinders off to these individuals to see the whole picture of what you're getting at the end of the day. And, an example for me is learning when I started at a company that had been a CDMO for some time, but didn't really understand that they were, because they had been a pharmaceutical company, and moving from that to a CDMO, the culture is very different, but they were working business as usual for 3 years. And when I came in and recognized that there was no understanding about really what development meant, what it meant by bringing other clients in to engage in those things. And so what I just try to start doing is just breaking down the walls between the different groups and then educating them what business development does, that we are out there. These are the slides that we're sharing. We're selling you as individuals, your technical know-how, your expertise, your ability to be able to manage these things through and create a drug that's going to potentially help somebody. And if you take blinders off of somebody who's just injecting, a solution into an HPLC and analyzing it, and then have them step back to see what that truly is giving, the full scope of a program, it gives a different level of value for that person in their job potentially. Right. So that's, I mean, it's a little kumbaya, as far as I want this whole company to kind of be together and understand each other, but it needs to be successful from my perspective. And the way you do that is through empathy, is through communication, is through transparency. It's through being able to hear and accept constructive input, being humble to say, I don't know this, or vulnerable to say, I need help in something. And all of that, I think, is so important in CDMO world, well, in anything in general, right? But as I look at cell and gene therapy, much more as I've been involved in it over the last couple of years.
Yeah, what you're describing is a very different kind of collaboration. One that is, as you said, it's not just kumbaya. It's not just creating a culture that people like to work in because they value collaboration, but this is something that's vital to the business. This
Yeah.
or this drug the development of this drug will just be stalled, and now you have a patient wondering what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, because the
incredible.
patients, it's a here and now, right? And the timeline of getting something to a patient has a timeline on it.
So when I think about this, when I try to think about this positively, so there's a lot working against us here. But if that lash up that you're talking about, that collaboration between the business development, the kind of pointy edge end of the spear there that's out trying to develop business, and the operations of the company, if that is working in a way that you're describing, it's going to accelerate the entire development timeline. It's going to deliver faster to this patient.
I believe so. I really do believe so, because you're bringing in clients that are going to be fit with what the company or organization can do. Business development is the advocate for not only our company, but for the client, right? And so there's a very important role there that they can play, because a lot of times if there's a problem, the client goes to the BD because that's who they know best, right? But it's transferring that relationship over. And then they're recognizing that what the BD sold them, as far as here's our expertise, this is what we can do. There's been enough scientific discussion with the internal subject matter experts to gain an appreciation and recognition that yes, they have this talent. And then you're delivering on what the BD has actually communicated we can. It just builds that trust that much more to be able to continue to grow. And one of the things for me when I'm leading a team and when we're talking about, okay, who is our clientele, there's criteria that you want to sort of drive into, and who is it that we really need to look at to sell whatever our focus is. But do they have a pipeline? Are they financially established, et cetera? And if you've got a company that has a pipeline and you establish this great relationship with them, it does open up the business to continue to strengthen that partnership through multiple assets that you can then support for them. Yeah. So that initial interaction is just so important. And if it's already misaligned because the BD has said something that we actually really can't do, or we're saying we can do, and we're going to kind of pretend and try and struggle behind the scenes to make it happen, then the likelihood of it succeeding is usually pretty low. And then it becomes a problem for the client and mistrust, and they move on. And one thing I remember hearing from somebody that was hugely impactful to me, and gentleman, he was CEO, and he actually came to the site and was very impressed with what he had seen, had said, you have something really special here. But then he admitted to myself, and this is, I was actually with my colleague, the CCO, and they said, clients are terrified to partner with CDMOs right now. And that was the word he used, terrified. And it was because there has been so many poor experiences of being able to deliver against the expectation that they were just so afraid, which is why, again, these are assumptions on my side or extrapolations, right? BD, clients who are looking at their asset want to vet 9 to 10 CDMOs out there, because everybody's saying, I could do what you need, just bring it in and you'll be our partner, and we'll treat you with white gloves. But there's got to be some other differentiators to help them really understand that that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think it starts with that connection and collaboration internally from an organizational perspective of the business development person truly selling the company and positioning the company for really what it is and what it can do.
Yeah. I want to ask you two final questions, and this may be a little tough, but I think you're exactly the right person to address this. So if you're sitting in a room, so you just spoke about a CEO who was terrified. I think those were his words. He was terrified.
Mm-hmm.
If you're addressing a room full of those CEOs, okay, those folks who are looking for CDMOs in the cell and gene therapy space, what would you tell them? What advice would you offer them in 30 seconds?
Oh gosh, I don't know if it could be 30 seconds. But I think there are really specific questions that you can ask to try to peel the onion back to really understand, do these things exist? Right? I mean, one of them is really understanding, if you go on an audit, what it is you're looking for. Is there scalability? Do they have the right thing? Are they built out in the right ways? A knowledgeable person is going to know that, the need for cell and gene therapy process-wise is not phase 3 in commercial right now. It just isn't on the grand scale of things. The capacity and what's needed is the technical know-how and ability to take a gene of interest and create toxicology material, to do the assessment pre-IND, to then go into, okay, yes, this is going to work, into the process of scaling things up, getting to a final product that has the right potency and yield and all the other stuff. And there's other technical things we didn't get into, which is the empty full and all of this other stuff that causes, side indications and all these things. But there are questions that you can ask to make sure these things are in place, and asking questions of, how often does the BD collaborate, and what's the cadence of communication with the operational folks? How do you onboard a client? What's the communication process there? How much involved does the BD get there? A lot of times I see, and this is just in past experience, once a business development person brings in a product or a sale, if you will, they remove themselves and they go and try and find something else. Everybody wants a hunter, right? Well, we're all kind of hunters because we're looking for the business to bring in. They don't want what's called farmers, which is just, I'm just going to help this one person and just try and bring these other assets in. You can be both, and you need to be both. And what I always say is that the word development is in the title for a reason, because you're developing a relationship over time and a partnership over time. And once you bring them in, you don't just leave them, you help and you advocate and you make sure that things are moving forward, and you call out to the PM on occasion to make sure things are going well. I'm going to go see the client, what's happening, and so I think that if I had a room of CEOs who are saying, how do I become not terrified? I think that's right now difficult in this space, because again, it's just so young and there are so many unknown things at the moment. But to be able to distill down of those, hundreds of CDMOs that are out there, there are specific questions that I think you can ask to sort of peel the onion back to really understand, are you being real with me? And, do you really have this capability, expertise, know-how, and everything else that you want to have there to be able to be a true and a strong partner?
Okay, one final question then. So, you really paint a great picture of what right looks like in these CDMOs. Now you have a room full of CEOs in the cell and gene therapy CDMO group. All right. And you want to tell them, okay, all right, everybody listen, take a deep breath and listen to what I'm saying. And what would you tell them?
So I would tell them some things a little bit similar, right? In that these things take time, and that the understanding of the real market, because that's one thing that we haven't talked about, that when I was really diving in on gene therapy, at the time, this a couple of years ago, there were 450 companies who were developing gene therapy products. And let me remind you, there were 300 CDMOs all vying for 450 assets to partner with, right? So whether either you win it with an Armstrong, an arm, race, whatever, or you have to have the right things in place to be able to partner, with those folks. So there is a big gap in that, and I think understanding really what is the opportunity first and foremost, and then developing targets and expectations from a bookings and a revenues perspectives around that, because you can't have a bookings and revenue target that is not even reachable because the assets aren't there, right? Number two is recognizing that we are in a development and early stage phase of where we are in this business. It's not about bringing in commercial clients, which is absolutely still possible, but it can't be the main focus. It has to be more on, let's collaborate with companies that are smaller, that want to partner, that we can meet their need, we can be nimble, we can be flexible, we can be collaborative, we can do all the things that everybody says they can do. But again, it's following through on those things. And then it's really understanding who is in your space that you have created with this company. What is your true capability? What can you do, and what can you do well? And what are some of the outreaches and potentials that can come in, and build the client profile and your marketing and your focus around that, because that's where you need to grow on, and allow the BD to be able to go out and sell that. And then also recognizing that BD are a wealth of information. And I often say, and anybody who may listen to this in the future who knows me will laugh, because somebody internally will look at a BD and say, you're at home, you're watching TV, you're eating bonbons, you're not doing anything. And a BD job is really, really extremely hard. And you have to be passionate about it, and you got to do the right things. But there's a wealth of information, because they're talking to people not only who might be good fit for your business, but they're also talking to people who are seeing the future of what kind of technologies you might want to bring in the future, right? So having that communication bridge, not only BD to operations, but BD to marketing, and BD to the internal leadership team, to say, we're really good here, but I'm seeing that this technology is going to be something that's up and coming, and we may want to invest in that, right? And so how do you start building the business around that? And that's where, again, the collaboration across everybody in the company is just so important to have. And then it's having the patience to allow it to build. And I think there are some things really important for BDs to have, and that's not often known, that they just feel like they can go out and get clients overnight. But I commented on ZymeWire, hugely important, having a really good contact relation management program, Zoho, Salesforce.com, there are some for small companies, some for large companies, knowing how to operate and manage opportunities, knowing how your cost structure is internally, and what your, all of your services cost from the baseline of how many hours in, how many personnel, what are the materials, what are the reagents, what's the overhead. And then BD can put a margin on top and sell it to the client, and hopefully be within market value, right? But all of these things, to me, when I've talked to various people, aren't in place. And because people want to work so fast, but it's so important to have that foundational aspect of these things in place for all of the important departments to be successful.
Well, Heather, I feel like we've just scratched the surface on this topic. This is really big, and I want to thank you for sharing all that with us. Gosh, we need you. This industry needs you so badly, and
You're
all
so
your
kind.
good thinking. But I have a big ask. Okay, so I think we just scratched the surface. Would you be willing to come back for a second interview and then talk about what you just described? What does this organization look like, and how do you build it out under all of these challenges? So that may be a little unfair. You willing to come back?
I would love to,
All
Perry. I
right.
would love to. I mean, this has been a really fun conversation, and there's a lot of pieces to it. There's a lot of moving parts, and cell and gene therapy make it really special because it is really special. It is the future of our medicine. Personalized medicine is going to be the way we are, and we may be 5 to 10 years out from perfecting it, but it's where we'll get to. And there are some really impactful stories out there that you can run across where you see young children who couldn't walk can walk again, because of some of the gene therapies that are out there. It's magical. It really, there's no other word I can think of that better describes it, because to me, yes, it's scientific, but it's magical when you look at really what it can do.
So important. There's so much
Yeah.
at stake. Well, Heather, how can our listeners contact you?
Well, I would just say LinkedIn is the best place to reach me. And would love to have a conversation with anybody. I am very passionate about this space. I have a lot of strong opinions, in some of these areas. And I think that there's a lot of good that can be done within this industry, and love having the conversation. So LinkedIn is definitely the best place. If anybody ever had a question or wanted to get some more clarification around some things that I've communicated on, that would be the best place to reach me.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you. My guest today has been Heather Nielsen Sugrue. I can't boil down all even I can't boil this down in a single statement that I can say, go on your way. You're going to come back and we're going to talk more about this. So I really appreciate your willingness to do that. So I would invite everybody to look for that. There'll be another interview, but just tremendous. Your experience in this space, this very complex space, all of your experience in marketing and sales and understanding the business and the science that has grown over years. Just thank you very much for sharing this all with us. And I look forward to seeing you on the next Trailblazer.
It's been my absolute pleasure, Perry. It's been wonderful. So thank you so much.